morning and welcome to Rising. We have a great show for you today. I'm Amber Duke, joined at the desk again by Niall Stanage. Good morning, Niall.
Good to see you, Amber.
Great to see you too. We're, 3 days out?
I know, it's ticking down all the time. It'll soon all be over, Amber. That's the thing.
The anxiety needs to leave my body. All right, we're going to get right into it, of course. We are days away from the presidential election. Polls still show the two candidates are neck and neck. 538 has Harris with 47% and Trump with 46% of the vote. Both Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump will be campaigning in Wisconsin today.
Tensions are high everywhere, and former President Trump is lashing out verbally at those he deems enemies. During an onstage conversation with conservative commentator Tucker Carlson in Glendale, Arizona Thursday, Trump had this to say about former GOP Representative Liz Cheney. Cheney, of course, now campaigning with Vice President Harris. Let's watch.
She's a radical WARHAWK. Let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her, okay? Let's see how she feels about it. You know, when the guns are trained on her face. You know, they're all WARHAWKs when they're sitting in Washington in a nice building saying, oh, gee, let's send 10,000 troops right into the mouth of the enemy. But she's a stupid person.
Now, let's remember that Liz Cheney helped to lead the January the 6th investigation in Congress, and of course she was one of the very few Republicans to call out Trump for his role in the assault on the Capitol. Cheney responded on X this morning, "This is how dictators destroy free nations. They threaten those who speak against them with death. We cannot entrust our country and our freedom to a petty, vindictive, cruel, unstable man who wants to be a tyrant."
Trump isn't the only one to observe that neoconservatives are infiltrating the Democratic Party. The Bulwark's Jonathan Lass sat with his crew to give their final thoughts on where the race is, and this is what he had to say. Let's watch.
To me, they had clearly been like, look, it's our last chance. We're going to do it all in this speech, right? So we're going to make sure that people know child tax credit, and we're going to build housing, and we're going to cap insulin prices, although I kind of thought they already did that, but maybe I don't have my policy as correct. But here was the thing about the cheering that I loved. Speaking of Stonewall, but also I think it's amazing when you get 75,000 presumably libs on the ellipse, and she's like, we're going to have the most lethal fighting force. And people are like, yeah. And she's like, and we're going to secure the border. And people are like, yeah. And I was just like, this is, and she's, you know, we are going to be leaders in the world, and we're not going to let these guys push us around. And I was like, man, the world's really changed.
Did the neocons just take over the Democratic Party? Don't say that.
Yeah, don't say it.
Oh my gosh, they're so joyful about this.
Very cheerful about it, which is quite alarming in all sorts of ways, as you have this weird confluence of people who had been quite far to the right in the Republican Party, Liz Cheney included, now sort of swinging over to the Democratic side, and then you've Trump being Trump in the middle of it all, being, for my money, rather too gleeful or almost sort of semi-excited about this imagery of guns trained in Liz Cheney's face. I don't think that really helps anybody very much.
I guess. I thought the full quote was fine. I mean, this is a common rhetorical device to talk about the neoconservative position, which is these are people who sit in an ivory tower and they make decisions about mostly working class kids who go off to fight wars. And so I thought it was a little weird that the media was getting so ginned up about this idea that he's making the point that Liz Cheney will never actually have to face the potential consequence of those wars, which is getting killed on the battlefield, more than they care about the kids who actually get killed on the battlefield.
So I think if one were to be generous enough to assume that Trump's actual meaning was what you just said, I think that would be fine. It is, as you say, quite a standard thing about armchair generals, people who are keyboard warriors encouraging other people to go and fight their wars for them. I think that could be legitimately something that Liz Cheney is criticized for, certainly could be something that Dick Cheney is criticized for. I think Dick Cheney famously said during the time of Vietnam he had other priorities while people were being conscripted to fight in the jungles of Southeast Asia. So that is certainly a valid point. I just took what Trump said about Liz Cheney to be less about that principle and more Trump's vindictiveness or desire for retribution against Liz Cheney for her opposition to him in various ways.
I don't know if I agree with that. I do want to, let's read a little bit more of it, because I think in context I mean, the imagery is intense for sure, but in context, it is pretty clear that he is talking about her warmongering. He says, in response to a question about Liz Cheney's impact on the Kamala campaign, well, I think it hurts Kamala a lot, actually. Look, she's a deranged person, but the reason she couldn't stand me is that she always wanted to go to war with people. I don't want to go to war. She wanted to stay in Syria. I took them out. She wanted to stay in Iraq. I took them out. I mean, if we're up to her, we'd be in 50 different countries. She's a radical WARHAWK. Let's put her with a rifle, and then, of course, we know the rest of that. And then at the end, he also says, she always wanted to go to war with people.
But you skipped over a little bit what he actually said after
Well, I just
the
didn't.
Cheney thing.
Well, sure. I didn't think we need to read it again since we did it in the intro.
Well,
but.
except that my point is when it's saying like 9 barrels in her face, I think there's an element of glee that he's taken in that imagery that is beyond the argument about neocons. Trump, I guess, does make the argument that America should intervene in fewer places or should be less interventionist generally. And as you kind of alluded to, that's an argument that one has been traditionally more accustomed to hearing from the left or from liberals. Trump, did put people like John Bolton in his administration, a guy who's never really met a Middle East country he didn't want to bomb. Yeah. And so that argument about neocons gets confused in Trump's case. I don't necessarily... If his argument is Liz Cheney wants people to fight in wars that she would not personally sacrifice for, sure, you can make that argument. I just think his argument is also this enemy of mine, deserves bad things to happen to her.
We'd have to agree to disagree on that one, but going to your point as well about his personnel decisions, which is totally a valid one, because of course in 2016, part of his America First package was getting the U.S. out of foreign wars, being more judicious about what conflicts we were getting involved in. He promised to end the troops in Afghanistan, to bring them home. And he did appoint people like John Bolton, who were traditionally WARHAWK neoconservatives. And he talked about that in the recent Joe Rogan interview as one of his biggest regrets from his first term. Does he know the right people now of who to put in those positions to make sure that his agenda is enacted properly? I don't know. He also talked about it in quite a funny way about how John Bolton was quite a little guy and him standing there and the world knowing that he was a crazy WARHAWK was kind of beneficial to him because he got to project this image that we would bomb you at a second's notice. Yeah. But I think one of the weirdest parts of this election cycle is the rehabilitation of the Cheneys by the Democratic Party. It's bizarre to me. I can't figure it out besides they just are taking anybody who's a former Republican because they're trying to appeal to that voter base, I guess.
So when you talk to the Harris campaign, their argument is that arguments about Donald Trump's fundamental unfitness for office purportedly land better with people in the center ground or a moderately right-wing position if they come from former Republicans. That is their argument. I'm not sure what the pro-Liz Cheney constituency is. Socially, she's way to the right of most Democrats. Whenever she was in her own primary, she got absolutely annihilated by a previously unknown, now Congresswoman Harriet Hageman, whose main asset was Trump's endorsement. And then there's the additional question, of course, of bringing Cheney to somewhere like Michigan. She and her father very identified with wars in the Middle East in a state where Harris has real difficulty with, yes, the Arab American population, but also a broader progressive wing of the party who don't like the Biden-Harris policy on that topic. So the efficacy of Liz Cheney in that context is lost on me.
Yeah, I completely agree. And your point about her position socially being very conservative, and her voting record in Congress was very conservative. She was scored really well by the American Conservative Union. And I think the fact that she's even willing to endorse Kamala against Trump does suggest that her primary calling card, her passion project, is foreign policy. And that's a problem for the Harris campaign.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think that this is the whole question of whether Harris can expand her base to encompass, Nikki Haley voters, essentially, or not, is going to be obviously a central question in this election. The Harris campaign believe they can do that. I'm skeptical of that idea, because I don't necessarily, if you were literally Nikki Haley, there are lots and lots of things that you disagree with Kamala Harris on. Haley herself notably has endorsed Trump, though there's all this question about her not being used on the trail and so on and so forth. So this idea that there is a strand of the conservative population who are just waiting for a cue to vote for Harris, I'm not too sure about that.
Yeah, just based on my read on this and the conversations I've had in conservative circles, this is really a sort of beltway phenomenon, and it's not something that can be replicated around the country, and certainly not in swing states like North Carolina, where the Harris campaign says they're really making a push to rural Republican voters, which boggles my mind.
Yeah, I mean, on the Beltway point, remember there was that vague idea that Liz Cheney was going to run like an independent campaign for presidency, and I thought, like, you might get some, you'll get the number of votes that are around the table on Morning Joe or something, but beyond that, I don't think so.
A Liz Cheney, Joe Manchin ticket. Wasn't that the dream at one point?
Which was the dream of like 7 people in the world, I think.
All right. Always good to find a few areas of agreement. We're going to cover more on the election and other topics on Rising right after this.